Let's talk about political boundaries, the different types of boundaries. Boundaries just outline an area that a government has authority, has sovereignty over, including the people and resources under its control. The government of Florida has control over the people and resources within the boundaries of Florida. Then they can go into Georgia or Alabama, where the governments of those states have control over the people and resources within those states. We're looking at this at a subnational level. We can also look at a national scale. The United States as a whole, as a country, has a federal government that has control, has sovereignty over the people and resources. We see that in every other country around the world: Canada, Belgium, the Netherlands, Mexico, China. We see that in Indonesia. I'm just listing off countries because why not? Boundaries separate areas governed by different groups, whether that be different countries or different states like Texas and Louisiana. We also look at the more local levels and look at different cities or different counties or provinces within a country or within a state. Boundaries can be drawn on a map. They can be defined on a treaty. They can also be demarcated, which means that they're physically there, like a town sign or the fence on your house or the gates to the city. Now let's look at antecedent boundaries and a bunch of different types of boundaries as well. The prefix ante means before. So what an antecedent boundary is, it's just a boundary that's established before a place is populated or culturally developed. And we typically see that based on natural features, because the natural features, the topography, the natural environment in an area was there before people were there. So that's what we see divides different people here and establishes borders. And we see a lot of different countries have borders based on these natural features. For example, in India and China, they're divided by the Himalayan mountain ranges. And Argentina and Chile, shown on the map here, they're divided by the Andes Mountains. It physically divides the two countries. Malaysia and Indonesia follows natural features such as rivers and mountain ranges as well. The South China Sea, as well as the Java Sea, divides different parts of Indonesia. And then we have mountain ranges here that divides Malaysia and Indonesia. And then Greenland and Canada, they're divided by icy waterways as well. So all these are physical features, physical parts of the environment that divide these countries or these different entities and creates the boundaries. So if you're taking the AP exam or just a test in your class, if you are given a boundary and it's a physical feature, you should be thinking antecedent boundaries. So let's move on to geometric boundaries. These are pretty easy to remember. These are just straight lines, and they often correspond with latitude or longitude. For example, the United States and Canada, part of the boundary is the 49th parallel, which is a latitude. Then we have Alaska and the Yukon, which is divided by the 141st meridian. It's a straight line here. That's what makes it geometric. There are many Australian states, many American states, some Canadian provinces are straight lines as well. It's very common to see straight lines as boundaries within countries or even between countries. Egypt and Libya is an example of between countries. We have a little bit of a straight line here. Libya and other countries, Egypt and Sudan, also have a geometric boundary as well because it's a straight line here. It's not an antecedent boundary because we're not dividing it based on some natural feature like a river, for instance. Then there's superimposed boundaries. These are imposed by an external power, an external authority, like another country. And this is without any regards to the existing cultural, ethnic, or physical divisions in an area. These boundaries are created usually due to colonization or imperialism, maybe conflict resolution, or some kind of political negotiations. What this means is that the people within the boundary didn't establish where their borders are. Some kind of external authority said so. So that can lead to tension, disputes, or even fragmentation within the boundaries as well. So one example of this would be Iraq and Kuwait, which was drawn by British colonial power, so that's the external authority here, and they ignored any tribal or historical ties, any connection between the two regions, and that later fueled the Gulf War, where Iraq invaded Kuwait to access the Persian Gulf here. Then we have Papua New Guinea, which is superimposed as well through a colonial era, and it divided the island of New Guinea into two different parts, Papua New Guinea, and then the rest of it became part of Indonesia as well. This is actually part of it's a geometric boundary as well, because most of it is a straight line. The borders of Poland were redrawn after World War II as part of conflict resolution. It was drawn by the Allied powers who won the war, shifting the country to the west to incorporate former German territories here. And we can see different changes in Poland starting from the year 1000 to the year 1945 when the boundaries were changed after the war here. Another example would be the superimposed boundaries in Africa due to the Berlin Conference, which is the European colonization of Africa during the Industrial Revolution. These partitioned the continent without any consideration to the hundreds of different ethnic or tribal groups within the continent. So, for example, Burundi and Rwanda were drawn by Belgium and Germany, and they disregarded any of the ethnic composition of the Hutus and the Tutsis, which are groups of people that don't really get along with each other, and it's resulted in the Rwandan genocide because of so much tensions and violent conflict with them being in the same country. They are fighting over their nations and fighting over political power and control. We have British colonization in Nigeria, clustering over 250 ethnic groups within the country, which has very much so influenced a lot of violence in the country, the politics of the country. The northern Nigeria is predominantly Islam, while southern Nigeria is predominantly Christian. Colonial borders between northern and southern Sudan have ignored cultural and religious differences, leading to civil war, and the eventual split, the devolution into the two countries, Sudan and South Sudan, in 2011 here. Next, we have subsequent boundaries. So these are boundaries established after the settlement of an area. They're drawn after changes in time and evolution to the cultural landscape here. So North and South Korea used to be united, now they're not. We have that demilitarized zone there now. This was a result of political negotiation. Then we have part of the Belgium and Netherlands border based on a river, evolved based on shifting river courses and political agreements as well. So the boundaries between Belgium and the Netherlands haven't stayed the same forever. They've changed over time. France and Germany as well. Portions of the boundary between the two countries have shifted after different wars, such as World War I with the establishment of the Treaty of Versailles. India and Bangladesh has changed. It resolved enclaves and land disputes based on territorial practicality. Basically, India claims certain land and Bangladesh also claims certain land, and they resolved it and disputed it here. And we can see here that India kind of surrounds Bangladesh a little bit here on both sides, and that was kind of the compromise that they had here. Let's look at consequent boundaries. So consequent boundaries are actually subsequent boundaries. They also occur with change over time. But we're looking at cultural changes. The boundaries are established to cultural differences, whether that be language, religions, or ethnicities. And to remember this, the C in consequence can also stand for culture. So that can help you remember it. So for example, Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. Northern Ireland is part of the UK. The Republic of Ireland is a country part of the European Union. And these two entities were once whole, but they separated. They went through devolution due to predominantly religious differences. Northern Ireland has a strong Protestant majority, while the Republic of Ireland has a Catholic majority here. Then we have the peaceful division of Czechoslovakia into the Czech Republic and Slovakia, and that reflected language differences and other cultural differences between the Czechs and the Slovaks. A lot of times when we see these consequent boundaries, we're seeing, of course, different nations that have different cultures creating two different countries here, or multiple different countries, as we'll see in just a second. We see India and Pakistan that's drawn into separate areas with a Muslim majority in Pakistan and then a Hindu majority in India. Eritrea has distinct ethnic groups and languages and a history of Italian colonialism. Ethiopia wasn't really colonized, and it's dominated by Amharic-speaking Orthodox Christians. The breakup of Yugoslavia into many different states like Croatia, Macedonia, which becomes North Macedonia, Serbia, Bosnia and Herzegovina. A lot of these nation states have developed due to the breakup of Yugoslavia. There were so many different political differences and cultural differences between these different nations that resulted in the breakup of the country in 1991. It was drawn to reflect the different ethnic and religious groups such as the Serbs and the Croats. Now we have relic boundaries. These no longer function as a dividing line. There's boundaries that don't work anymore, but they're still present in the cultural or physical landscape, but they don't serve as an actual boundary anymore. The Great Wall of China is a great example because it was originally built to protect China from nomadic tribes that would invade the country, but they don't have to worry about that anymore. So the Great Wall of China is just there for tourism. Then they had the Berlin Wall, which divided East and Western Berlin during the Cold War, and that fell in 1989. The parts of the Berlin Wall are still there. You can go and still see it, just like the Great Wall of China, but they don't serve as a boundary anymore because Germany is just one country now. Then there's the Mason-Dixon line, which is in the United States. It became symbolic as a divided line between free and slave states for the Civil War. But now the Civil War has occurred for about over 100 years or so, and there are no longer slaves in the United States. So that boundary does not really exist anymore between Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Delaware. What type of boundary are each of these examples here? Let's do a bit of practice here. So the first one, the Sykes-Picot Agreement in 1916 between Britain and France created artificial boundaries in the Middle East, dividing the Ottoman Empire into zones of influence. So the Ottoman Empire was not part of Britain and France. Britain and France are external entities that created this agreement to divide the Ottoman Empire. So that's a superimposed boundary. The next one, the Iron Curtain between communist Eastern Europe and capitalist Western Europe. That boundary does not exist anymore. It doesn't have any purpose because Eastern Europe is not fully communist and Western Europe is not fully capitalist. So that's a relic boundary because it doesn't serve a purpose anymore. Next, we have the United States. It's annexed Alaska and Hawaii to become parts of the country, and this happened in the 20th century. And this has occurred with change over time because the United States used to not have Alaska and Hawaii. So that's going to be a subsequent boundary. The next one, the boundary between Egypt and Sudan in Africa, is a straight line along the 22 degrees north latitude. That's going to be a geometric boundary because it's a straight line. And then finally, Myanmar and Thailand, their boundary is partially marked by a river, and that river probably existed there before human settlement. So that's going to be an antecedent boundary there. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe. It really does help me out, and it costs $0. I have some free resources for you in the description down below if you'd like to use them. If you have any AP Human Geography related questions whatsoever, don't hesitate to leave a comment down below the video or send me a message on Discord. I'll see you guys in the next video though. Adios.